Revenge with Karen.
The room smelled like burnt coffee and career death. That morning, Linda had packed her favorite mug, the one with the chip on the handle and world's okayest employee in peeling letters, because something in her gut told her this meeting wasn't about quarterly growth. And she was right. Effective immediately, the COO declared, smiling like a televangelist mid-grift, Linda's position is being dissolved under standard, at will restructuring. Standard, my ass, and just stood there like a statue while the founder sat beside him, eyes locked on a stain in the carpet like maybe if he stared hard enough, this betrayal would evaporate. No thank you, no farewell, no handshake, not even a fake apology about moving in a different direction. Just silence, like she was a smudge on the company's timeline they could now conveniently erase. Her team froze, one intern dropped his stylus, and the sound hit the floor like a gunshot. HR shifted awkwardly behind their laptop, already opening the termination checklist template. Linda didn't flinch. No tears, no tantrum. She calmly unhooked her ID badge, walked it over like she was returning a library book, and set it into the HR director's palm. Then came the twist no one expected. She turned and approached the firm's outside counsel, Jeff from Brenton and Maynard, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. From her worn leather tote, she pulled out a plain, white sealed envelope. No return address. No label. She handed it to Jeff like it was nothing. For your records. Jeff blinked, took it. Then Linda walked out. Not fast, not slow, just the steady gait of someone who knew exactly what the hell she was doing. Before we go on, hey, real quick, if you're one of the 95% listening without subscribing, now's the time. We drop these stories daily. A single click helps more than you think. Tap that subscribe button, smash that like, and let's keep roasting these corporate clowns together. Now, back to Linda. The elevator ride down was oddly serene. She didn't even push the lobby button, someone else did. Her reflection in the chrome doors didn't look like someone who just got ambushed in front of 80 colleagues. She looked relieved. You see, Linda had suspected this would happen. Signs had been creeping in like mold behind drywall, missed calendar invites, project access revoked without explanation, sudden vendor flexibility chatter during budget calls. The new COO, Martin, had rolled in 6 months ago wearing $600 sneakers and that itchy energy of a guy who thinks redlining contracts makes him Sun Tzu. And Linda, she had dared to tell him no. Not once. Repeatedly, especially when he tried to push through a strategic data sharing agreement with a company she recognized, because she'd flagged them 2 years earlier in a compliance report tied to licensing fraud. Martin didn't like that. Called her rigid, overly cautious, and non-agile. Whatever the hell that meant. Linda didn't push back. She documented, quietly. Every meeting, every forwarded email, every change in protocol, every skipped sign-off she was supposed to approve, but mysteriously wasn't CC'd on. She built a timeline, then buried it inside one memo. Stamped and signed. The kind of thing that makes outside counsel very, very nervous. That envelope, yeah, it wasn't just for their records. Out in the parking garage, Linda unlocked her car, an old Subaru that still had dog hair in the back from a golden retriever she lost in the divorce, and sat behind the wheel, exhaling through clenched teeth. She didn't drive away immediately, just sat there, letting the weight of her silence settle. She wasn't going to make a scene. That would have been satisfying but stupid. Instead, she'd planned something quieter, slower, more surgical. Because sometimes the best way to collapse a rotten house isn't with a wrecking ball. It's pulling the right nail. And Linda knew exactly which nail they'd ignored. The walls of her cubicle felt narrower than they ever had, and as you don't have to be crazy to work here. But it helps Plaque stared back at her like a joke from a timeline she no longer belonged to. She opened a banker's box and began filling it with the objects of a life lived quietly at full tilt. Color-coded binders, a ceramic cactus from the office Secret Santa, a half-empty bottle of Advil, and a framed photo of her and her dog, Rascal, on the day she'd finally out-negotiated a 12-month audit freeze. No one said anything. Nobody dared. The ones she'd mentored looked especially haunted, like maybe if they didn't make eye contact, they wouldn't be next. HR lingered in the hallway like an overqualified mall cop, pretending to scroll her phone while watching Linda through the corner of her eye. The startup's infamous transparency culture now felt like a zoo enclosure, with her as the exhibit. Only Mark from procurement broke the silence. As he walked past, he stopped just long enough to whisper, "This is wrong." Linda didn't look up. just gave the faintest nod and kept wrapping the power cord around her monitor like she was prepping it for a garage sale. She opened her company laptop, hit log out on every single platform: email, Slack, Timesheet Pro, the CRM, their compliance dashboard, and then, slowly, methodically, she deleted the local sync folders. Not hastily, not maliciously, just enough to make sure she wasn't leaving them anything they didn't already own. Then, from the zippered pocket in her worn tote bag, she pulled out a matte black USB drive. She'd had it on her keychain for months, tucked it inside a makeup pouch next to an old tube of Burt's Bees, and slid it silently into her personal bag. It held everything: her notes, screenshots, exported emails, time-stamped files, internal vendor documents that were never logged into their review system, deal memos signed by the COO without routing through compliance. One PDF in particular, labeled FOIA Risk Flagged, showed a licensing agreement pushed through for a data vendor based in Nebraska. The issue? That vendor had previously been denied clearance for handling regulated consumer analytics, and the address they listed matched the property records of Martin's cousin. Flashback to 4 months ago, Linda sitting in her home office, glass of wine untouched, scanning through a spreadsheet that didn't add up. A payment went through to a shell corp that hadn't been cleared. The internal timestamp showed it processed on a Saturday. No invoice, no vendor ID, no record of approval from compliance because she hadn't seen it. That was the first nail. Over the next 12 weeks, she traced 7 other transactions. Small amounts, nothing that screamed criminal, all tied to vendors with murky structures, shared mailing addresses, or conveniently misfiled documentation. When she brought it up gently, professionally, in a meeting with the COO and founder, Martin laughed. "Don't sweat the small stuff. These aren't red flags, they're efficiencies." Linda had smiled, nodded, and gone home that night to start building a chronological report. She didn't make threats, didn't storm the castle. She just documented, time after time. Now, standing in her emptying cubicle, she paused for a moment and looked out over the open office floor. Same as always: industrial chic desks, those faux hipster Edison bulbs, acoustic panels pretending to matter. But something had changed. They thought they'd erased her, that she'd just vanished like all the other non-cultural fits who got squeezed out between Series B and Series C. But Linda didn't believe in cultural fit. She believed in traceability. Last thing she packed was a sticky note from her monitor. It read, "If you don't sign off, you own it." A quote she'd once told a junior analyst back when she still thought ethics could scale. She folded it and dropped it into her coat pocket. Then she turned off her desk lamp, picked up her box, and walked out, past the fake plants, past the wellness posters, past the HR director who still wouldn't meet her eyes. Linda was done. But the mess they'd made was just beginning. The coffee shop was the kind of place where everyone looked like they were writing a screenplay or pretending to. Linda chose it precisely because it was forgettable, neutral decor, low lighting, and enough white noise from the espresso machine to drown out a confession. She sat in the back booth, alone, sipping lukewarm chamomile tea and watching the door. He walked in right on time. Carl Hess looked like someone who never smiled in photos. Late 50s, military posture, plain gray suit with a tie so tight it could have choked a confession out of a senator. Former state-level regulatory officer, now legal consultant for M and a deals on behalf of firms who could afford discretion. She knew because she'd researched him for 6 months before finally reaching out through a burner email. He slid into the seat across from her without a handshake, just a curt nod. "You're Linda," he said. It wasn't a question. "You're Carl, talk." He didn't start with the envelope. Not yet. Instead, she played it the way he'd expect. Hypothetical, she began, unwrapping a sugar packet like she had all the time in the world. Say a mid-sized tech firm licensed state-restricted data assets, but the vendor used a P.O. box to disguise its jurisdiction. The company didn't verify, signed the deal, processed consumer analytics anyway. Carl raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Now let's say, she continued, those assets were foundational to their service pipeline. And a third-party auditor, say, during an acquisition, discovered the oversight. What happens? He leaned back. Acquirer halts the deal. Depending on how critical the data is, that could trigger an indemnification clause. Maybe even clawback provisions if the firm misrepresented itself during diligence. At worst, he paused. Regulatory freeze. License suspension. Lawsuit. Linda nodded, lips barely twitching. Buyers would, she asked. Buyers would sprint. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Unlabeled, crisp, she slid it across the table like it was her lunch receipt. The front page was stamped, Exhibit L. Carl opened it. Inside, a condensed audit trail. Names redacted. Time-stamped screenshots. Memos. Copies of internal chat logs. Vendor agreements. All organized into neat little subsections that even a hungover junior associate could follow. Flipped through 3 pages. Then he stopped. His jaw didn't drop. He didn't gasp. He just went still in that way only people trained to recognize liability do. After a long pause, he looked up. How long have you been building this? Since the day they tried to force me to backdate a vendor approval. He tapped the folder. This isn't a whistleblower packet. This is a grenade. Linda sipped her tea. It's insurance. Against what? Whatever happens next. She wasn't smiling, but something inside her finally loosened. Not joy, not pride. Just the pressure release of a woman who'd been clenching her moral spine for 2 years. I'm not looking to go public, she said. I'm not suing. I don't want a payout. I don't want headlines. I want distance. Carl tilted his head. Then why me? Because you have friends in acquisition law. Because you've testified in front of the FTC. Because you know exactly how much weight a sealed memo carries when it's notarized and archived properly. He stared at her, then closed the folder. And you've already filed this somewhere, with their legal firm. The day I was laid off, titled, dated, sealed, unopened, as far as I know. Carl nodded once, slowly. Then you're good. If they go to market and that memo surfaces, it'll raise every red flag in the book. And if they suppress it, the liability's worse. Push the folder back across the table. You want advice? She didn't answer. Keep your distance. Keep your hands clean, and for God's sake, don't warn them. I wasn't planning on it. Carl stood, smoothing the crease in his jacket. They made you the scapegoat, in public. They'll regret that in private. As he turned to leave, he added, You're not looking for revenge, Linda. You already won. Just don't spend the check all in one place. She sat there a long while after he left, watching the condensation on her tea glass drip down in perfect, silent symmetry. A different kind of calm settled in her bones. Not rage, not triumph, just readiness. Some people screamed to be heard. Linda, she preferred paperwork. And this particular packet was more than leverage. It was the fuse. 5 years is a long time in tech, but Viron treated Linda's exit like she died on a business trip, and they just quietly rerouted her per diem. No statement, no postmortem. Her Slack account was wiped. Her access to the compliance drive, revoked within minutes of the layoff, became just another inactivity lockout in the audit logs. Internally, they spun it as a mutual decision. The founder, Davis Rohn, told the board she'd wanted to try something new. Told clients she'd left on good terms, pursuing independent consulting. Told himself, probably, that burying 7 years of policy infrastructure under a fresh, agile direction was the right call. It wasn't. Because while Viron was polishing its Series C slides and pretending to innovate by adding unnecessary AI to things that didn't need it, Linda was building something quieter, sharper. She started small, 1 client, 1 laptop, a filing cabinet she bought secondhand from a municipal auction in Lakewood. Registered her consultancy under a nondescript LLC Blue Thistle Analytics. She operated out of a 1-bedroom apartment with bad plumbing and a view of a brick wall. But she had discipline, and more importantly, she had memory. Linda knew where the bodies were buried, and more importantly, which clients Viron had started neglecting. The ones who grumbled about customer support, the ones whose renewal emails went unanswered, the ones who'd been quietly shuffled off to junior teams so the C-suite could chase shinier, bigger fish. He didn't steal clients. She just answered their calls when no one else did. First came Rowley Mutual, then Cardscape, then 3 more over the next year, each one sliding across to her side of the fence without noise, without press. Her rates were lower, her audits cleaner, her turnaround times faster. She didn't have a sales team, she didn't need one, and she never once mentioned Viron, she didn't have to. By year 3, Blue Thistle had grown enough to require an assistant, Marcy, a whip-smart compliance nerd from Ohio with a sense of humor sharp enough to shave drywall. Together, they built a lean portfolio of mid-range firms that cared more about stability than flash. The kind of companies Viron had once depended on and outgrown. Meanwhile, back at the mothership, Davis had moved into more of a strategic visionary role. Translation, coasting on buzzwords while taking midweek golf calls. And Martin, the COO who had orchestrated Linda's exit, was now president. He trimmed departments, outsourced QA, rebranded twice. And every so often, when talking to potential partners or junior analysts, he'd drop lines like, I've always been a big believer in clean compliance. That's just baked into our DNA. Funny, that DNA was still built on Linda's framework, most of it still active, barely altered. But no one mentioned her. Not when they scored an industry award for data ethics, built on a white paper she wrote and they never revised. Not when they presented a case study at Strat Edge Summit using graphs from a model she drafted 2 months before her termination. And certainly not when they started dropping hints in investor calls about acquisition readiness. Because Linda wasn't a chapter. She was a ghost. Except ghosts have a habit of lingering, especially when they leave behind artifacts. One such artifact still sat in a fireproof cabinet at Brenton and Maynard LLP, Viron's longtime legal counsel. Fourth drawer down, back slot. Labeled simply, Linda M. Thorne, sealed, DNR unless requested by external auditor. It had been there since the day she walked out. No one had opened it. No one had asked to. Until now, because the acquisition whispers had turned into meetings. Those meetings turned into term sheets. And those term sheets triggered diligence protocols. And somewhere, deep in the inbox of paralegal tasked with scanning historical disclosures, a question had just been asked. Anything flagged as sealed or pending? The paralegal, chewing gum and halfway through a tuna sandwich, replied without much thought. Yeah, one thing. From 2019. That memo, the one Linda never followed up on, never hinted at, never dangled for attention, was about to see daylight. And unlike everything else at Viron, it hadn't aged. It had matured. Haley Tran, junior associate at Colfax Jensen LLP, was 36 hours into the soul-sucking black hole known as pre-acquisition diligence review. Her eyes were fried from spreadsheets. Her left contact lens was doing a slow death spiral toward her tear duct. She had Postmates soup congealing somewhere near her elbow. Still, she was sharp. She had to be. This wasn't some rubber stamp acquisition. Viron Analytics was a $500 million purchase, pending final review, part of a massive portfolio expansion for Marrow Data Group, a Fortune 100 beast that could smell compliance issues like a bloodhound on espresso. Haley had been digging through 5 years of vendor contracts, security assessments, SOC 2 audit summaries, and internal policy updates. Most of it was boilerplate, breezy, overly polished, and suspiciously self-congratulatory. The kind of language that screamed "look how above board we are" while subtly reeking of deodorized rot. She wasn't looking for obvious problems. She was looking for the weird stuff. At 2:17 a.m., she found it. An entry buried in the regulatory correspondence archive of Viron's legal disclosures. Line item that stood out like a typo in a love letter. Exhibit L pending review sealed submission from former compliance officer. Archived by Brenton and Maynard LLP. Do not review without external trigger. There was no attached file. Just a note that it was held in physical storage at B and MTK's legal office, submitted on August 14, 2019. Coincidentally, exact date of the personnel change memo where Linda Thorne's name disappeared from the org chart. Haley frowned, jotted it down, then flagged it in the internal diligence dashboard under deferred needs partner input. Next morning, post-coffee and pre-anything resembling rest, she brought it up during the 8 a.m. council review with senior legal partners. So I found something, she said, flipping her screen around. Archived memo, labeled Exhibit L. It's sealed, came from a former compliance officer. Marked for review only if triggered by external party, which I'd argue, as a potential acquirer, we qualify as. One of the older partners, Jameson Burr, squinted at the screen and shrugged. We've seen this before, cover your ass stuff. Sealed memos never amount to much. Usually an HR squabble or a petty slap at leadership on the way out. But this one's been untouched for 5 years. So if it's nothing, it's nothing. But if it's something, he sighed. Fine. Contact Brenton and Maynard. Have them overnight it. Mark it low priority. Unless it says here there be dragons, it's probably just a grudge file. Haley didn't argue. She'd seen how these things worked. The big fish always assumed the net was fine, right up until something bit through it. She sent the request. Simple, direct. Requesting physical Exhibit L from 2019 Compliance Archive, Linda M. Thorne submission. These label as confidential and include chain of custody receipt. The courier picked it up within hours. She received the shipping confirmation by noon. Expected delivery, tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. That evening, in a windowless war room 3 floors above street level, Marrow's due diligence team prepped for their final review. The tone was celebratory. The numbers checked out. Contracts were in place. Revenue models were bulletproof. Founders were prepped. Press releases were being drafted. Haley sat off to the side, quietly noting her flag still marked Exhibit L en route. Burr glanced at her, almost smirking. "You don't really think that memo's going to change anything, do you?" She gave a tight smile. No idea. But inside, her gut twisted. Because Viron's documentation was too clean, their responses too rehearsed, and that sealed memo wasn't some disgruntled rant, it had weight. Real weight. He didn't know who Linda Thorne was, but the memo had her name on it, and it was about to land on their table like a lit match dropped in a vault full of gas. The conference room smelled like money and cheap celebration. Someone had clearly pre-gamed the closing, flutes of champagne already lined up like trophies along the marble credenza, and there was a sad little pop of confetti just as the buyer's CEO, Richard Halbridge, shook hands with Davis Rohn. Photographer snapped the moment like it was a wedding. Davis beamed. Martin, now president, had a grin that stretched too far across his face, like he'd just convinced God to underwrite his next fiscal quarter. Everyone in the room had their "we did it" faces on, except for one man. Jameson Burr, senior counsel from the buyer's legal team, sat toward the back. He didn't clap. He didn't smile. He didn't even look up when the photographer turned toward him. His fingers hovered over a thin manila envelope, labeled in block letters. Exhibit L confidential / external auditor access only. It had arrived an hour earlier via courier. No digital copy, no summary, just a chain of custody receipt and a single line in the accompanying memo. Submitted by Linda M. Thorne, dated August 14, 2019. Subject: Internal compliance violations / data licensing breach. He opened it. Inside was one single typed page on Viron letterhead. No fluff, just cold, surgical language. Attached to the back were 3 exhibits: a notarized compliance memo with Linda's original signature, a series of timestamped screenshots, and a summary of a licensing audit she'd run independently weeks before her exit. The memo laid it out in devastating detail. A vendor contract, central to Viron's data stream, had been signed under false jurisdiction. Data itself, sourced from a provider banned from operating across state lines without specific compliance waivers. Waivers Viron never obtained. Worse, internal emails showed Martin pushing the deal through despite the flagged violation. One line from Linda's memo was underlined twice in blue ink. If this data source is monetized under the current conditions, Viron will be in breach of federal guidelines under Section 12B. Burr read it once, then twice, and a third time just to make sure he wasn't misreading. He closed the folder slowly, like it was radioactive, then leaned over to Halbridge, who was halfway through a forced chuckle about scaling responsibly without losing our scrappy soul. "Ask him who she is," Burr said quietly. Halbridge blinked. "What?" Burr didn't repeat himself. Just slid the folder into the CEO's hands like a priest delivering a last rite. Halbridge opened it, scanned a few lines, and froze. Martin noticed the shift. His smile twitched. "Everything all right?" Halbridge didn't answer. He just reached forward and calmly closed the deal binder on the table. A crisp, surgical motion. The room went still. Someone coughed. The photographer lowered his camera. A champagne glass clinked awkwardly against the tray it rode in on. "What's going on?" Davis asked, tone dipping from cheer to concern. Burr spoke before Halbridge could. "We're pausing the acquisition. Effective immediately." Martin's laugh was half a beat too late. "Wait, what? Is this a joke?" "No. What the hell is this about?" Burr didn't look at him. Instead, he turned to the founder. 5 years ago, your head of compliance submitted a sealed memo outlining a breach that directly impacts your licensing eligibility under federal data regulations. Davis blinked like someone had just spoken to him in Morse code. "That can't be. That, no one's ever mentioned. Submitted it to your own legal counsel. It's been sitting in archives since the day she was terminated." Martin paled. "That's not, look, if there was something wrong with the vendor, we would have flagged it. We've done dozens of internal reviews." Burr cut him off with the calm, sharp tone of someone who's watched 1,000 suits try to outrun truth. "We'll be requesting a full investigation into the matter before proceeding. If the violation is substantiated, it invalidates several warranties in your acquisition disclosures. That makes this entire deal non-executable under its current structure." Halbridge closed the folder, handed it back to Burr, and stood. "Thank you for your time." Then he turned to Davis and Martin, face unreadable. "If this checks out, and I suspect it will, your deal just halved itself." The buyers walked out. The only sound left was the faint hiss of champagne going flat. Martin's face was blank. Davis looked like he'd swallowed a paperclip. No one noticed the unopened bottle of champagne at the far end of the table. It was labeled for Linda. The champagne went warm in its glasses. No one touched it. The photographer quietly packed up his gear and slipped out the door like he'd wandered into the wrong funeral. Martin stood at the head of the table, hands braced against the wood, face flushed like he was trying to sweat out a confession. His jaw moved like he had words. Every one of them got stuck somewhere between panic and plausible deniability. "This is overblown," he barked. "It's a memo, a dated memo. Who even knows if it's valid?" Davis didn't respond. He was staring down at his phone, scrolling furiously through an old email archive, fingers trembling. "Davis?" Martin pressed, voice cracking now. "We can fix this. We bring in our own counsel. We prep a rebuttal. We spin the narrative, say the memo was speculative or incomplete. Hell, we leak that she had an axe to grind. She got laid off, right? Who's going to believe someone with a grudge?" Davis didn't look up. "Shut up, Martin." The room fell silent again. Davis rotated the laptop toward him and opened a folder labeled compliance/thorn/2019 Q2. After a few seconds, he found it. An email chain. It was dated May 16th, 3 months before Linda was escorted out. Subject line, licensing concerns, vendor #284N. Linda's message was direct. Clinical. Per our last conversation, I'm attaching preliminary notes on the jurisdictional conflict surrounding vendor 284N. I strongly recommend we pause integration until a waiver is secured from state regulatory counsel. Moving forward without one puts our entire compliance framework at risk. Below that, a response from Martin. Noted, we'll circle back. Focus on onboarding priorities in the meantime. And beneath that, nothing. The thread ended, no waiver, no action, just silence. Davis finally looked up. His face had gone gray, you knew. Martin opened his mouth. I didn't. She never pushed the issue. It was a suggestion. She submitted a sealed memo. I didn't know she did that. Brenton and Maynard logged it. She walked it in the day she was terminated. Silence. Side counsel was dialed in before the second hand hit the minute mark. The lead partner at B&M answered on speaker, sounding groggy and confused until Davis snapped. Did Linda Thorne submit a sealed document the day she was let go? Yes, hard copy. Labeled Exhibit L. We flagged it for archive under pending review, outside counsel access only. You approved that categorization. Martin blinked. You categorized it. Davis turned to him. Told me she handed you her badge and left without a word. She did. And you didn't think a sealed envelope to legal might matter? She was bitter. What was I supposed to do? Open it on the sidewalk? PR was already being looped in by then. A draft statement appeared in Davis's inbox within 20 minutes. We are aware of historical compliance discrepancies and are working closely with our partners to ensure full transparency, blah, blah, damage control. None of it mattered because the acquisition wasn't paused, it was bleeding out. The buyer had frozen all negotiations pending an investigation. Their counsel had quietly begun contacting clients named in the audit logs. Rumors would start leaking within hours. Partners would ask questions. A vendor flagged for regulatory fraud in the current market. That wasn't a stain, that was a siren. By noon, Martin's calendar was cleared. His assistant ghosted. President title on the website was quietly changed to executive transition lead, whatever the hell that meant. Someone, probably Davis, tried calling Linda. Once, straight to voicemail. No callback, no text, just dead air, and maybe that was the loudest part, because Linda didn't need to say anything. She didn't need to threaten, didn't post, didn't gloat. She had done what only a few in that building ever truly understood. She documented. Now her silence was an avalanche, burying the smiling photographs, the press drafts, the confetti, the champagne. There was no salvaging this with spin. You don't contain a 5-year ticking bomb. You just watch it go off and pray it doesn't take your name with it. The formal request for audit escalation landed in Viron's inbox at 9:12 a.m. the next morning, 12 hours after the champagne went flat, 9 hours after Davis Rohn had started researching golden parachutes in incognito mode. Subject: immediate suspension of acquisition terms pending forensic review. There were no pleasantries. No legalese fluff. Just cold bullets. All licensing agreements dated from Q1 2019 onward to be revalidated by third-party counsel. All vendor contracts tied to flagged assets frozen pending review. Internal communication logs requested from relevant compliance officers, executives, and legal. Valuation status downgraded pending regulatory clearance. The message might as well have been written in blood. Viron's market value was chopped in half before lunch. And then the logs came out. The buyers had demanded access to Viron's internal messaging platform, a Slack clone called Zinc that kept archives even after deletion. The first wave of recovered messages read like a roast of every rule Linda ever enforced. From Martin, dated 3 weeks before her termination. If Linda cites subsection 9.3 one more time, I'm going to start charging her rent for living in the past. From a product lead, she should tattoo compliance on her forehead. Then maybe she'd shut up about it. From Davis himself, response to her memo warning about vendor hash 284N. If we let her slow us down for another quarter, we'll miss the runway and get eaten. Sometimes you just push through the paperwork. They weren't just dismissive. They were mocking the very architecture keeping them from collapse. Now it was being read by Merrow's legal team, line by line, with the kind of attention usually reserved for FBI wiretaps. Every joke was now evidence. Every emoji. Red flag. The due diligence room had transformed from a high-fiving strategy zone into a legal ICU. Martin, officially placed on leave by 2:40 p.m. The kind of leave with an asterisk that meant don't come back until we tell you you're gone. The PR team shifted from press release prep to triage mode. Industry outlets were already whispering. Analysts flagged the pending acquisition as high risk. Clients started pulling back. One contract, worth $9.7 million annually, was canceled before sundown with a 2-line email. We no longer feel comfortable proceeding. Thank you for your service. Meanwhile, in a quiet office 12 blocks away, Linda Thorne stood by her window, stirring a mug of weak tea. She hadn't checked LinkedIn, hadn't answered her phone. She hadn't needed to, because Merrow came to her. A nondescript man in an expensive jacket showed up at the Blue Thistle office unannounced, introduced himself simply as Dan, didn't give a last name, handed Marcy his card, which said only Strategic Partnerships Merrow Group in minimalist font. Linda emerged from the back room and motioned him in. They didn't talk in legal hypotheticals. He didn't dance around the reason for the visit. They both knew exactly why he was there. I'll be direct, Dan said, voice low, eyes sharp. We're reconsidering the acquisition, but our leadership wants to retain the infrastructure Viron should have had. You built it, quietly, thoroughly. We'd like to discuss a role. Linda smiled politely but said nothing. Dan continued, nothing public, no press, full autonomy, clean slate, name your rate. She walked over to a shelf and pulled out a blue folder, thicker than the one she'd submitted 5 years earlier. Labeled post-departure findings, dated, indexed, color-coded. This, she said calmly, is everything I didn't submit in 2019. Dan raised an eyebrow. Why didn't you? Because they were already going to drown in the first bucket. No need to open the floodgate. He didn't ask to see inside. He didn't need to. You haven't burned the bridge, he said. You detonated the foundation. She shrugged. I kept receipts. Dan stood, smoothed his jacket. We'll be in touch. Linda nodded. You already are. He left without shaking her hand. That was fine. He didn't like handshakes much anymore. That evening, as dusk soaked the skyline in orange and the city went back to pretending it understood karma, Linda filed the folder back into her locked cabinet. She hadn't even used her last card yet, because unlike everyone at Viron who wanted leverage, she'd already built hers, out of silence, receipts, and time. The call came at 7:04 a.m., before traffic, before emails, before the world started pretending everything was fine again. Linda let it ring twice before picking up. Thorne, she said, voice clear, calm. On the other end, a voice she didn't recognize. Warm, professional, purposefully vague. Miss Thorne, this is Julia from Merrow Group. I'm reaching out on behalf of the board. Linda didn't say anything. Just waited. We'd like to formally offer you a leadership position, compliance integration lead, across all portfolio firms under our acquisition arm. You'd report to no one from Viron. Full independence. Build the structure from scratch. Your terms. The offer hung there for a beat, like a peace treaty sent to the last survivor of a war everyone else lost. Linda walked to the window of her small, sun-warmed office. Outside, the city moved in slow motion, coffee carts setting up, delivery trucks sighing to a stop, commuters with earbuds, and nowhere near enough sleep. She thought about the years she'd spent inside Viron's walls, speaking into rooms that pretended not to hear her. The reports buried, the warnings dismissed. The endless, hollow meetings where Martin droned on about efficiency like it was a synonym for don't ask questions. She thought about the look on Davis's face as that binder snapped shut. The moment the confetti turned into fallout, she thought about all of it and felt nothing. No heat, no rage, no thrill, just completion. I appreciate the offer, she said, and meant it, but I prefer independence. A pause. Then, well played, the call ended. No applause, no headlines, just silence. Later that week, the acquisition deal was officially restructured. The new terms were dry and brutal, asset absorption instead of equity purchase. Half the valuation. No retention packages. No press release. Avis Rohn stepped down with a prepared statement full of gratitude and forward-looking optimism. Martin, gone. No notice. No farewell. The LinkedIn change happened quietly, like he'd simply evaporated. Word spread in whispers. Internal review findings, contract clawbacks, a forensic audit that confirmed systemic governance negligence. It was all wrapped in legal shielding, but everyone who mattered knew exactly what happened. Everyone who mattered now knew Linda Thorne's name. On Thursday night, after locking up the office, Linda walked to the corner bar she used to pass by every day on her way to Viron. Back then, she was always too tired or too busy to go in. That night, she did. She ordered one drink. Neat, quiet. Her phone buzzed once. Unknown number. No contact photo. The message was short. How long were you planning that? She stared at it for a moment and typed, "Since the day you told me to pack my things." She hit send, didn't wait for a reply. She tucked her phone into her jacket, leaned back in the booth, and listened to the hum of normal life around her. Darts hitting cork, beer glasses clinking, someone arguing gently about the score of a game she didn't care about. Some exits come with screaming. Lawsuits, press. But Linda's, her exit was surgical. Silent, and the echo it left behind was the kind you could still hear, 5 years later, in the boardroom walls. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.